Hi guys, my name's Seb Shooter. I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about an article from Time Magazine that I saw, which goes into the topic of millennials want jobs and education, not marriage and kids. And I feel like this is a fairly simple, straightforward thing to understand, but it's something that also raises a very interesting and important point that often gets missed. And I've talked about the kind of millennial matters before, the millennial problem, referenced Simon Sinek, who had his viral interview where he goes into discussion around the millennial problem and where some of the responsibilities lie, some of the bits and pieces going on, how attitudes have changed, how thought processes have changed, and how the world has kind of forced us to develop in this interesting way. I'll leave the article that I'm actually referencing, which includes in itself a link to the report that is being quoted here in regards to the new the US Census Bureau report that's being touched on. Also, I'm sorry if I look a little shiny and a bit overhyped at the moment. It has been an incredibly busy day, and it's stupidly warm outside all of a sudden, so I'm not prepared for this. I don't do well in the heat, and there you go. But moving on to the topic at hand. Ultimately, this one article highlights more so than anything else that modern Americans aged between the ages of 18 and 34 value education and jobs over things like marriage and children compared to their counterparts from 1975. Now, there's a whole slew of additional data that goes with this, and I actually feel that some of the rest of it is far more important than what they highlight. But the stuff that they are highlighting is nonetheless kind of interesting, and I feel like the main point that is being missed here is that millennial individuals, people who have grown up to be kind of the main bulk of the workforce in the modern period, and granted this is for the United States specifically, this census data, rather than anything else, but it's a point that I still feel is being somewhat missed, and that is that whilst we might not, as millennials, feel that being married is as important, or having children is as important as having an education or a job, the reason for that is more because if in the current world, if you're not in education, then you're not doing anything, and if you don't have a job to support you, then you're just going to languish. You're going to have nothing. You're not going to be able to have any agency or control. If you want to get married, if you want to have children, if you want to own your own property, if you want to have your own car, and so on and so forth, you are going to have your own income. The best route to higher income is through higher levels of education. And I feel like that's the thing that's being missed here, because even in the report, looking through the sections on being kind of married and stuff like that, they're saying that you just don't have that much interest in it. If you go up to the initial figures that are being quoted more than anything else, transition to formal education, formal schooling, and full-time employment are at the top end of it, with like 62, 52, 50% of respondents all saying that those are the things that are most important, and with only 10 to 12% saying that getting married and having children are the most important things. And it's like, well, yeah, but look at what it's compared to: finishing your full formal education, finding full-time employment, capable of supporting yourself or your family financially, financially independent from your parents, which again is another form of supporting your parents' finances, because they no longer have to support you. No longer living in your parents' household even is only at 26% of people finding that an extremely important thing, where most people are saying it's somewhat important, but it's not vastly so. And the one thing that stands out is that you've only got between about 5 to 10% of people that suggest that completing your education, finding a full-time job, and supporting yourself financially are the are not important at all. Everyone is agreeing that these things are the most important from some of the metadata that has got, or some of the data that has been taken from various sources to put into this report. And again, is this surprising? No, it shouldn't be surprising at all. And in fact, then looking down at the breakdown that's more specifically from the 2016 current population survey, annual survey, blah blah blah. But from more recent data, that number has grown. Where before we had a lot of people directly saying that schooling was more important at about 60 odd percent. To be fair, that number's about the same. But in terms of the people who are getting married and having children, that number seems to have dropped slightly in terms of what's important. You know, you've got a lot of weird and interesting things that stand out here, and it's bizarre. And not only also then when we take a look at the difference between adults who have had children and got married and the percentage changes between 1976 and 2014 that they highlight in here in a little infographic. Every single kind of metric in terms of women having children, women getting married, men getting married, all of them are lower. And again, what's the reason behind this? Well, they're going to be suggesting that it's just not as important anymore and all that kind of thing, but it's not as important. And the reason why is because survival is always going to be more important. And it doesn't seem to be that difficult to understand, but it also almost seems to be that certain areas of the media are suggesting that it's because it's wanton rather than not. But then you actually get down to some of the appendix tables here where they are demonstrating that more than half of younger millennials live with their parents still, so they don't have direct autonomy or they can't afford it. Less than 2/3 of older millennials live independently, which again isn't all that surprising. It's not an affordable thing to do anymore. Even in the States, where they've got swathes and swathes of land and all manner of places that they could put affordable housing, and kind of develop those kind of areas for their ever-growing population, they don't. And then you look at the last table here that they've got that shows that 1 in 4 young people living at home are neither in school or working. And then I feel like there has to be more of a question as to why that is. Is it because they have concluded their schooling? Because as here it suggests that of the individuals who aren't working, a good number of the people looked through in this survey, you've got about 25,000 odd people who aren't working and aren't enrolled in education, but do already have high school diplomas, associate's degrees, or bachelor's degrees. And it's a case of, well, yeah, so that it's not their education that's at fault. It's potentially that they either have there are going to be some people who have written themselves out of working, or who have other issues, for example, disability and things like that. But of that number overall, looking at it, we're seeing that the total number of people that have disability that have been covered in this are only about 15 odd thousand people. And of that, you've got about 9,500 people who are out of work. So even if we take away about 9,500 people from the 25,000, you've still got a lot of people there. You've still got the vast majority of people from that subset who are still well educated and yet still out of work. And, you know, there have to be questions asked around that. It was just, I wanted to make this video because it was a thing that stood out to me in terms of here's this thing, and even if it's not explicitly said, it's suggesting the you know, these millennials are a problem. The report concludes, if one theme describes how adulthood has changed over the last 40 years, it is growing complexity. Well, fine, okay, so adulthood has grown in complexity in terms of the transition from being a child or a late teen and moving into adulthood. So yeah, there's some more complexity there. Sure, great. That's a great finding there. But how does that help the young people who are unable to support themselves, unable to chase the relationships and the living situations that they want? It's a lot of information that's been thrown out here that is being highlighted more as, again, look at the headline. Many millennials want jobs and education, not marriage and kids. No, that's a misnomer. It's not accurate. They want marriage and kids, but they need jobs and education. Yeah? Whilst marriage is, to a degree, an outmoded thing, and having children is by no means as important now as it was 40 years ago, it's still a case of those are still things that people want. If they didn't want them, our society would be dying out. And we are starting to see the impact of that in certain places. Japan as a place the very openly and actively is struggling with that kind of issue, where pairing up and kind of the way that people act is very much counter to continuing the growth of their population and the collapse of parts of it as a result of the individuals who are slowly kind of breaking down and degenerating the stuff that has been there for generations, because you've not got enough people going into certain industries or taking over certain family businesses or just not producing enough children to support things anymore. We've seen similar problems where populations were controlled, like in China, where now they're having to lift those policies and trying to recoup, as now it's proving to be damaging. And it's not a case of not wanting those things in somewhere like the United States where this information comes from. It's a case of not necessarily being able to support, afford those things. I believe one of the last figures that I saw around this, which was from a while ago, I'll grant you, said that from birth up until the age of 18, the average child, at least within the UK, costs somewhere in the region of like £250,000 or something like that. And I imagine that figure has only grown, considering kind of what that means and what various treatments and things, and how our NHS is collapsing and how certain other things are falling to pieces in this country. I would imagine that number has grown to one extent or another, if not purely just because of things like inflation. But then it's still a case of going, well, no, if you're pitching, is marriage and having kids important? No one who lives right now, who is currently building their lives, is going to say yes, because the things that you are going to have to compare to when it comes to those situations, it's not something that marriage and children and something that you're thinking outside of yourself for is going to win. There's people are struggling enough nowadays in terms of finding relationships, finding love, feeling like they're not lonely anymore. The whole having marriage and kids thing it's just not on their plate. How do people who are very, very driven and who want a certain type of life, how are they going about that? Well, they're throwing themselves into their work, into their education, they're dedicating themselves to it, and they need to do that these days, because otherwise they're not going to get anywhere. But the thing that then stands out is this causes a problem, because it unbalances that person's life, and it means that their mental health deteriorates, their physical health deteriorates, their connections with other people deteriorate. You find them looking for support and friendship in an environment that does not support friendship or companionship of any sort, because it is a competitive working corporate environment or something like that. The number of young managers that I've met who tried to substitute making friends and going out and doing things and seeing things with just the people that they worked with when they were in charge of those people. The lack of professionalism that causes, the problems it causes, the HR concerns it causes are huge and bizarre and obscene in some instances. And so looking at those situations, yeah, it's not as important because of what it's compared to. It's not because of what they want. Want isn't the thing that needs to be brought into this. Jobs and education are what these individuals, what millennials, what people between the ages of 18 and 34, as per the individuals that were examined in this report, that's what they need. Marriage and kids might be what they want, but it's not going to help them get anywhere if they jump the gun. But anyway, guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because, you know, this is something that I've seen from the individuals I've worked with the people that I've coached, with the things that have been going on even in my life, considering I'm turning 30 this year, and it's terrifying because, you know, that's a potential third of my life gone, and I've got certain things to show for it. You know, I'm proud of my accomplishments, but it still feels very short of what was maybe expected of me, simply because the expectations were based on things that came from other time periods, which hasn't necessarily affected me directly, but at the same time it's always something in the back of my head going, it's always tempting to give into. It's always tempting to say, well, it's their fault, they've ruined everything, and so that's why I'm in the state I am now. That's why I can't compare to that, because it's all their fault. And there's an element of that that's true, but at the same time it's always a case of then going, well, no, the situation is what the situation is. I have to live in the present. I can't dwell on the past, complain about the past unendingly. I can raise it as an interesting point. I can raise it as a point to be taken into consideration, but it cannot be the be-all, end-all, because my actions now determine my future, not anything else. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you have to say. As said, I'm kind of running on a lot of energy, so I'm going to be going straight into the next video after finishing this. So if I seem to be running with the same kind of talking very quickly that I am at the moment, then fair enough, but I'll see you in the video tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, then drop us a like, share this video and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the video tomorrow. Take care.